Hello and welcome to today's video. Today is a comparison of two pens that I have, for some reason, lumped together in my head as being very similar. And I know why, and you can see why. The two pens are the Platinum Century 3776, and it's a Chartreuse Blue, which is beautiful, and then the Pilot Custom 74. Now, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about each pen very quickly, give a description of it, all of that basic stuff. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about why I put these pens in a similar sort of category. Then I'm going to do a very, very quick writing sample just to show them in action. And then I'm going to do something I don't normally do in these comparison videos, unless it's blatantly obvious. But in this case, it's not blatantly obvious. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say which is my favorite of these two pens and why. Let's get started. Let's start with the Pilot Custom 74. So the Pilot Custom 74, one of Pilot's entry-level gold pens. Simple pen. This is the smoke and clear version, so it's got smoke end cap and finial, and simple cigar-shaped pen. As I said, demonstrator pen, clear. Cap swells out to the cap band. Just below the cap band, you get a little tiny sort of like a little taper down to the end of the cap. The barrel of the pen is primarily cylindrical, but sort of has a slight taper on it, and then has a nice rounded end. The section is also that smoke material and tapers and then flares, and then you're left with a 14 karat gold, not super big, about the size of just over a number 5, but is the proprietary Pilot size nib. Simple plastic feed there. It screws to reveal where you would put a cartridge or a converter. Pilot are proprietary, once again, cartridges and converters. I have a Con 40 in this, I think, and it is, I don't like the Con 70, the VAC converter. I prefer these ones. I just find the other ones too difficult to clean, and I don't necessarily find the ink capacity for my use is much more. So I understand there is more ink capacity in the Con 70, don't worry. I like this model of pen. I like the size of this pen. I like the feel of this pen in the hand. I like the clip with that ball on the end there. It's strong and it's functional. The entire pen is strong and functional. Just a really solid, what I would consider solid everyday writer that isn't going to break your budget entirely. Not a super cheap pen, but isn't going to break your budget entirely. The pricing I will talk about later is the Australian pricing, by the way, just to give a sense of it. Next, we have the Platinum Century 3776. Now, Pilot are a little more limited in their colours. There's a range of them, but what Platinum have done really nicely is they've had a stock range of these pens, and then they bring out their special editions, which sell for a little bit more and just sell out before you can get your hands on them in some cases. Once again, simple, rounded ends on the cigar-shaped pen. The cap swells out to the band, where you get like the little taper down to the end of the cap. The body is mostly cylindrical, tapers down to the cone on the end there. Screws to cap, little taper down and then flare out on the section, and then a slightly bigger nib. This is closer to a number 6, once again, not a standard nib size, in 14 karat gold. This one is gold coloured, as the trim on this pen is gold. The feed, once again, is plastic. This is a cartridge converter pen, once again proprietary to Platinum. Platinum, I think, have of the 3 main Japanese fountain pen brands, Pilot, Sailor, and Platinum, I think that Platinum have the better converters. They're a little bit more robust, have a slightly better ink capacity, and I found them just to be a little bit more reliable. But their cartridges are also great, and they'll fit every pen down to the preppy. The Platinum has its slip and seal mechanism in the cap, where there's like a little spring-loaded cap liner, which is designed to prevent the pen from drying out, and I think it does a pretty decent job of that. There are a few videos online of people leaving pens for a year and they still write first time every time. It's one of the best things about this pen is that it writes first time every time. Aside from a few of the very obvious physical differences in terms of color and a few shape things and a few slightly different dimensions. In terms of dimensions, let's just like put them alongside a Lamy Safari here, so you get a sense of the size of these pens. The Safari is, in my mind, like a fairly standard sized fountain pen. It is about 140 millimeters. So these pens are not far off that. If we look at the pens uncapped, the two Japanese pens here, once again, they're not far off. The Pilot just slightly longer, and actually when they are posted, which they both do post, and post relatively sort of securely in a friction fitted kind of way, the Pilot once again edges out ever so slightly further ahead. If we look at the sections, the dimensions are fairly similar, the Pilot section being slightly longer, but they are both this tapered section to a metal band and then threads. The Pilot doesn't have a step down off the barrel, where the Platinum has a very slight but not sharp step down. The distance between the back of the section and the end of the nib, which is actually, in my mind, a more important measurement on these two pens, is pretty bang on. Very, very similar. Other differences, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, you get there are special editions of the Platinum brought out sort of yearly or seasonally, and the Pilot is sort of more standard. You've got a few standard colors of the Pilot. There are a good range of them, but I think Platinum do slightly more interesting things in terms of the editions of the pen. They also have a wider range of nibs available, particularly in Japan. Pilot lending themselves primarily to, sort of like extra fine or fine through to broad, whereas Platinum have everything down to ultra extra fine and a couple of sort of specialty nibs like a music nib available for this pen. Why have I partnered these pens together in my head? Well, from a very basic perspective, I bought them around the same time. These and a Sailor 1911 standard with the music nib were all brought probably within a month of each other. And so just to test, the basic models of their gold nib pens. So yes, they came into my collection around a similar sort of time. But the main reasons, firstly, they both have these plastic body with metal trim, which is a standard, like that's not anything unusual to these pens, but it is a similarity they share. They share a similar cigar-shaped pen body. So those rounded ends, sights swell out to the cap band, and then sort of taper down off the barrel. Sort of similar-ish. They are both Japanese pens. As I said, these are two of the main brands, or the sort of the three big name Japanese pen brands along with Sailor. They use a proprietary cartridge converter system. So both Pilot and Platinum have made their own cartridges and converters to fit these and their other pens. There is a converter you can get that allows the Platinum to use standard international, but that is not made by Platinum. So you do have a couple of very similar things as basics there. The other thing that really pulls these pens together for me is the fact that they are both entry level, and I go entry level because entry level is different for everybody, but in terms of entry level gold nib pens, these are probably two of the most common. The Pilot Custom 74 and the Platinum Century 3776 are held up as really good first gold nib pens, and a lot of people who take that step from things like, the TWSBI 580s and those sorts of pens move into these pens. In fact, anyone who I've spoken to who says they love the Pilot Metropolitan, I have basically said, get a Pilot Custom 74. It is a great step up. And then I think a great step up from this pen is a step up to the Pilot Custom 823, which, as you can see, is a slightly bigger pen there. Uses a vac filling system. Once again, has an 18 karat gold nib, as far as I know. 1 second. Actually, no, it has a 14 karat gold nib as well. Just a bigger nib and a very different feeling on the page. I always get that one confused. But is once again a big price jump up from the 74. And while we are on price, that is another reason why these two pens, in my mind, are at a very similar place in the market. In Australia, the price difference between these two pens is just $35. The Platinum can be found for around the $200 mark, give or take, mostly give. And the Pilot around $235. Now, that's not to say you can't get them cheaper in Australia by buying from Japan or overseas or on the grey market or whatever the case may be. But new retail price, that is roughly what you are looking at in Australian dollars. Once again, the Custom 823, being around up to $490. So those are reasons for me why these two pens are in a very similar place in the market, why I have lumped them together in my head and in my use of pens. Now, I have different nibs on these. In fact, I did have 3 models of the Platinum. I now only have 2. I had the Fine, which was just too fine for me. The Soft Fine, which I'm not a big soft nib fan, but I find it to be an interesting nib to keep. And this, which is the Broad. And then what I have in the Pilot here is actually the medium. Now, I find the medium on the Custom 74 to be not far off like a Western medium, maybe just a touch finer than some, and the Broad here to be just broader than a Western medium. So let's do a quick writing sample with these, and then I'll come back with what is my personal, not yours, not anyone else's, but my personal choice out of these two pens. As always, for the writing sample here today, I have Clairefontaine 90-gram paper. We're going to start with the Pilot Custom 74. Now, both of these pens are inked with the same ink, which is Lamy Black. So this is just a very quick writing sample just to see how they write. So there are a few things I really love about how this pen writes. Firstly, I said I'm not a soft nib fan, and I'm not, but this nib has a nice, gentle softness on the page. It's springy. It's not flexy, it's not soft in that way, it is just springy. But what you can also see is it's actually pretty wet. And what that means is that, not necessarily with a black ink, but with, nice inks that I put in here. An ink I love in this is Diamine Terracotta, is that we get a really nice shading from this pen. And if the ink sheens, sometimes you get a hit of that as well. So it's nice and wet, it's very smooth. Not buttery smooth, but very smooth. And of course, being Pilot, one of the leading Japanese pen brands, it is super reliable and super consistent. Next, we have the Platinum Century 3776. And as I said, this is the Chartreuse, I think I spelled that right, blue, and I have this in a broad nib. Now, firstly, it's not super broad. I should also say the ink here, as I said, is Lamy Black. Not super broad. Broad enough? Definitely. But for a broad nib, in comparison to even say to the medium of the Pilot, there's a little bit more feedback on this nib. It's not a dry pen, once again. There's a little bit more feedback, but it's also not quite as wet, I don't think, just in the everyday sort of writing as the Pilot is. You see on some of the faster writing, it lays down just a smidgen less ink, still very consistent, but not generally speaking, the wettest pen on the market. Well, now comes my decision time. And this is a hard choice. These are both classic modern pens. I think the Platinum has a lot going for it. I think it generally has probably a higher standing in the pen community than the Pilot does. I think its choice of nibs is a really great pro. I think people like the finishes. I like the fact that they come out with interesting designs within the finishes. If you look at some of them online, you'll see beautiful like inlaid patterns within the plastic or, you know, sort of shimmering effects, things like that. They do interesting, nice, pretty things, whereas the Pilot is just a little bit more utilitarian perhaps. It's a little more function over form. So, what do I choose? Well, for me, my cap goes to the Pilot Custom 74. That slight softness in the nib that allows for some beautiful, a little bit more ink down onto the page so we get some nice shading and things like that. I like shading in ink. That is a big factor for me, and that is one of the reasons why I chose this pen. Also, I think the medium writes beautifully. So as I said, this is my decision out of these two. If I had to pick up one of these two, I would be picking up the Pilot Custom 74. I think Pilot has a long way to go with things like the converters. For a company that's 100 years old, I think they really need to get their head around the converters. Like, this is a converter. This is the space that the converter could fill. There's almost, 2/3 of an inch there where it could be a longer converter, giving us more ink capacity. Also, the way the converters are made with the springs and the agitators and all those sorts of things just stops it being a big fill. Not a problem for me, seeing as though I change inks fairly regularly. But I just love the form and the feel of this pen in the hand. I like that it feels unified from top to bottom. It's very solid in my hand. The plastic feels good. The nib feels great. I like that sort of more basic, less flashy sort of look. There are less flashy versions of this. I have the black with the gold trim. But there's something about this particular pen I really enjoy, and I just love the feeling of it on the page. So for me, out of these two, and it would probably be different in a month's time, but today, my cap goes to the Pilot Custom 74. There you have it. I hope you found this video interesting and useful. If you did, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notifications button if you want to stay up to date with the videos that I produce. Please feel free to get in touch using any of the platforms listed below. You can find me on Instagram or Twitter at @the_offstage_me, or you can contact me on any of my videos here or drop me an email which is listed down below. If you've got products you think I should be looking at, or if there's a way you'd like to support the channel by sponsoring a review or providing an item for review, I would love to hear from you. In the meantime, enjoy your pens, enjoy writing, and I'll talk to you soon.